How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Midcurve. I don't know what episode this is actually. I think I've lost count, but I think it's number 9 or something around there. But today we have someone you've all been asking for. Actually, I get a lot of messages and DMs about this, but Solana Legend on the podcast, one of the OGs. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm really excited for this episode.
That's awesome. Where are you right now? Actually, you look like you're in a pretty sweet spot.
I'm in an undisclosed location in the United States.
Okay, okay, I didn't know if you were still in Dubai. What? Because you went to Dubai, right? For the how
Correct.
was the
Yeah,
Armageddon there?
man. I will say everyone that sort of like arrived early for the Solana hackathon was sort of rewarded because we flew in a couple days early before it started raining, and then it just didn't stop raining. It's sort of like one of these, 10-year floods where about a year of rainfall fell in one day, and the entire city was just not equipped from an infrastructure standpoint to handle even 1/10 of that rain. So there's no drainage system, and people were just freaking out. Cars abandoned on the road, kind of apocalyptic, to be honest. But we were safe in our crypto bubble, just talking about meme coins and sort of, the latest deep in projects and developments on the Solana network. So we were fine. But people trying to fly in had a lot of issues in terms of like delays, and I think a lot of flights got routed to Oman, which is another
Mm.
country that's nearby. And I think there's even a Oman 2049 group chat at one point, and I was just waiting for them to create a network state and drop a token.
Exactly.
They were
Yeah.
probably like one or two steps away from just reaching escape velocity and sort of like achieving sovereignty as a decentralized community. But these people were able to make it to Dubai in the end, and it was all fine.
I can
That's
imagine that being like a sneaky good place to do BD. Like if you're, in the trenches like that at the fall of, civilization in Dubai, I bet, good for connecting, right?
Yeah, and I feel like these conferences, a lot of people say they're a waste of time. I sort of like I sort of believe in this space. It's such an asymmetric and dynamic space that one conversation can change your life, literally.
mm,
And it's sort of like you just got to have more shots on goal in terms of talking to more founders, talking to more developers, and sort of like getting a pulse. I like Token 2049 a lot because it brings over folks from Asia that typically don't make it out to the North American events. So, like, traditionally, the North American events are like Stanford Blockchain in Palo Alto. You've got Consensus in Austin. You've got a bunch of like institutional events in New York City and some other smaller stuff. But generally, folks in Asia make it out for Token. And I think it's a really good mix and sort of like an idiosyncratic mix of folks you don't speak to every day.
yep. Yeah, that's 100% true. I've been going to these conferences since like 2017. And there have been maybe 2 or 3 conversations that I've had that have like completely changed the trajectory of my life. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm on board. I'm on board with that. So before, I mean, let's jump in, I guess let's step back a little bit and talk about how you like got into crypto, and then like the lead up to Frictionless.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to tell people I'm sort of like an OG internet kid. I mean, not in terms of like being an OG on the like OG internet days, but for most of my adult life and even most of my childhood, I was just sort of like terminally online, as our friend Ansem likes to say. Um,
Yeah.
from about 2007 and sort of that like early YouTube sort of like machinima era, I was gaming, and I was just like online 24/7. Any free moment I had, I was talking with my friends on instant messengers like I am. I was on social media like MySpace. I was, early on Facebook as well in like 2006. So I had like a lot of reps in sort of internet communities, and a lot of this was through gaming. I was a huge
Mhm.
MMO fan. I played RuneScape, more hours of RuneScape and World of Warcraft than I'd care to admit. And really, like, I think it's sort of like a superpower because a lot of folks in the space actually came from that sort of like school, right? A lot of these guys were OG gamers, and there was just a huge intersection, a huge amount of overlap with crypto. So I actually did my first Bitcoin transaction in 2013, selling WoW Gold for Bitcoin. right? And I would not say by any means I was in the space, in the crypto space. I was like not even in high school at that point in time, but it opened my eyes to what crypto could be, right? And it allowed me to do a transaction, and sort of like I was very in tune with sort of like the in-game currency aspect of these different games, and I love like the money making aspect of like WoW and RuneScape. But then I realized Bitcoin was sort of like an in-game currency for the real world, and it was a digital native currency that didn't depend on a bank. I was too young. I didn't have a driver's license. I couldn't open a bank account, but I could do a Bitcoin transaction. No one cared. Like no one cared if I was a, 14, 15-year-old kid. That no one asked any questions. They're just like, oh, okay, cool. Like I can vouch for this kid. He's not going to scam you. Like he's good. You can transact with him. So it's very peer-to-peer OTC days. But I think that sort of opened my eyes. And then sort of I went down the traditional finance path. I studied finance at Cornell and applied economics, and pretty much just like started working as an investment banker in M&A for a number of years. I was covering infrastructure, renewables, and sort of like energy as well. So I did a bunch of M&A for about 3 years or 4 years. That was my first job, but I sort of kept up, albeit more passively, sort of like with Bitcoin and Ethereum and that sort of thing. But my life changed during COVID. One of my friends from Cornell actually was really early to Solana. He was working for a fund that had been a Solana seed investor in 2018. And he actually told me about Solana right around mainnet. Like, I don't know if it was like right before or right after, but it was sort of in that like deep sort of like pandemic lockdown, era. And he told me, hey, Diego, you should take a look at this blockchain. It's completely different from anything that exists in the world. And the first time I sort of like looked at it, I was like, oh, okay, cool, like whatever. Kept working as a banker. And then he hit me up like a couple weeks later, and he's like, yo, you really got to look at this. And he sent me the white paper. And then I read it and I was like, okay, I've sort of like messed around on Ethereum enough to know sort of like how these blockchains work at a high level. But this is like radically different. Like this is a completely different consensus algorithm. It's a different way to propagate data. It's a different way to do storage. And it's a different execution environment, right? The virtual machine is parallelized. So I was sort of like, okay, this is either going to go like straight to zero or it's going to change the game forever. And sort of like at that point in time, I did a couple Solana transactions, and I was like, wow, like this feels like fiber optic. Like this feels like going from dial up to fiber optic, skipping broadband in between. So I was sort of like, you know, I'd used ETH enough to know that like a lot of people that were bullish on ETH and Bitcoin were sort of like massive bag holders. So they were sort of like bullish on their bags, and sort of talking about this as if it's like the future of France. Which at the time I think they were extremely innovative. Obviously, like we wouldn't be having this conversation without Bitcoin and Ethereum. But at the same time, just from a usability perspective, I came at the space from a different angle. I was sort of like, man, if I can, use this and the fees are so small, I don't even realize it's charging me a fee and it settles instantly as if it's a Web2 app, like pressing like on an Instagram post. I was like, this is a Web2 like experience. This is something actually billions of people will use. So I sort of like went all in on Solana because I just had a stupid amount of conviction in how usable it was. And I sort of like left curved it extremely hard. I mean, I literally put my life savings into Sol. Um, Made it my brand on Twitter, right? I called myself Solana Legend because I felt that convicted that this was the blockchain that was going to achieve like global scale. And then over time, I networked in the space and sort of like got involved very heavily in the NFT scene, minted SMB, helped start Monkey DAO, which was the first NFT DAO in Solana. And then I met Logan, and that was sort of like a big pivotal moment in my crypto career because I had the left curve thesis really sort of like nailed down. But when I met Logan, he gave me the right curve thesis, and sort of we went back and forth and debated this for like a year or a year and a half before starting the fund. And that's when I understood both sides of the equation from first principles, how these blockchains actually worked, and just how innovative Solana was, and just how hard it scaled. And I think at that point, I was perfectly happy sort of being very concentrated with my personal investments in Solana. But once we sort of had that right curve thesis as well, that's when sort of like we had the conviction to definitely, play this game with other people's money as well and sort of start the fund.
That's so it's funny that you say that because that's very close to my story. Like I've told you before, but I heard about Solana very early on, like 2019. The difference is that I didn't have the like choice to left curve it. It's just I am left curve basically. So I just, I left curved it on accident and I and I basically went all in on Solana um, really early on. But the thesis was very similar in that like it's cheap, it's easy to use, it's fun, it's fast. And like I had been also like I was in Bitcoin in 2013, 2014, been playing with ETH in 2017. And like when I was using ETH, I was just like, there's no way that most of the globe is going to use ETH. They just can't afford it,
100%.
and
Yep.
two, it's just kind of annoying and slow. Now again, like I love Bitcoin, I love ETH for certain things, and I love Solana, but it's just like for scale, if Solana figures out these tech issues, like for scalability wise, Solana just seemed obvious to me. What do you guys the number one question we've got on Twitter is like, what's your thesis, what's your Abel thesis? So can you jump into
Apple
that a little
thesis.
bit? Yeah, that was like the number one
Sure,
question we
sure.
got
Let
when
me. Yeah, yeah. The Apple community is wild. I have to hand it to those guys. Maybe I'll like paint the like broader fun thesis first, and then I'll go a little bit into Apple.
Yes.
But I think broadly speaking, um, infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure is not super interesting, right? Like during the Industrial Revolution, people were not building tollways and sort of like ports and ferryways. They're not building them for fun. They were building them between point A and point B because there was a commercial reason and there was industrial efficiencies to basically building out a network, and then accruing value over sort of like a lot of cargo, right? And I think sort of the crypto space, unfortunately, a lot of it is a lot of expensive science projects and folks that don't really have the product mind to actually remember that like infrastructure is actually like a means to an end. Infrastructure is not the end. Infrastructure enables better applications that onboard users, that in turn, onboards more developers, which in turn onboards more users, right? And that's sort of like the flywheel. And I think for the first time with high throughput blockchains that have parallel processing similar to Solana, similar to Sui, Aptos, and Monad, these sort of blockchains, these are the ones that actually enable the best infrastructure and the most scalability and the best performance. And as a result, you can build much, much better applications on these sort of blockchains than you ever have in the past, right? And we sort of like to use the analogy of going from sort of like dial-up internet with a 56K modem to sort of like broadband. And when you made that jump in infrastructure and sort of like networking, you enabled YouTube, right? You couldn't do YouTube on dial-up internet. Um, and equally, when you went from sort of broadband to fiber optic and sort of low latency, high throughput, like 1 GB up and down, symmetric internet connection, suddenly you could do sort of low latency gaming and real time streaming in 4K and all these different things, right? And again, you unlock a new sort of like tier of applications. So we're really bullish on high throughput blockchains, the ones that are parallel processing and low latency, and sort of like the incremental applications that are built on top. And these are the ones that are sort of like 0 to 1 applications. So I'm not talking about AMMs. I'm not talking about, first generation marketplaces and wallets, like stuff that's already been done many times on Ethereum and even, in Bitcoin now. What we're more bullish on is sort of like these incremental use cases, sort of similar to like deepen networks or games with microtransactions, or for example, next generation financial primitives like payment for order flow or central limit order books. These sort of things which you simply cannot do on ETH. And I think that's where that's the bleeding edge of app development and sort of product development. And it just so happens it's on high throughput blockchains. So to answer your question, we're investing in, these next generation, call it Gen 3 blockchains, which we've written pretty extensively about. And then sort of like the most novel applications and use cases that are built on top. We're pure play. We're not investing in any legacy EVM chains. And we feel as new managers, this is where the biggest opportunity lies.
Yeah, I was going to say these sound like, really big swings, right? Trying
Yeah.
to find some of these narratives before they, have a moment and suddenly everybody's copying them. Can you talk a little bit more about the general investment philosophy of Frictionless? Because it sounds like, a lot
Yeah.
of this is an effort to be first to something, and like I said, take a big swing on something before it really has established itself as a narrative.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you say that because that's exactly how we think. We're thinking quite differently from most funds in this space, and it's really the first principles reasoning that Logan learned at Tesla. I think that really guides that. We spent about a year, almost 2 years, sort of cooking up our thesis and sort of like how we approach the space and how we invest prior to actually like raising any dollars or anything. Um, so really, what if I had to give an analogy? We're sort of like looking at these high performance, high throughput distributed systems, how they're going to scale, and we're trying to envision what that world looks like. Maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 3 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now. And we're, say take Solana, right? We've got, at that point, Fire Dancer is shipped. It's been upgraded. They've got these modular tiles. They have zero downtime upgrade. They can upgrade this network constantly. Jito Fire Dancer is probably the top client on Solana. They probably have multiple leaders as well, so the latency is super low. You can trade on chain with no KYC, probably just a little bit slower than a centralized exchange. So just a delightful sort of trading experience. It's extremely accessible. On ramps and off ramps that are built all around the world. People, own coins and tokens more widely than they own stocks, U.S. equities. Many more people own digital assets, for example, right? This is sort of like the worldview that we're investing for. So to give an analogy, we're sort of like thinking of that faraway land, that beautiful land, and then we're thinking, okay, well, if this is what the land is going to look like, where is all the value going to accrue? If we had to go in there and buy real estate, what's the most valuable real estate? Probably like the nice parcel right next to the river with a nice view of the ocean, right? That's probably like going to be expensive, right? So we're looking at, in that sort of like post fire dancer world, post high throughput, network optimizations. Solana is a global synchronized state machine, with consensus at the speed of light, and we're sort of taking one step ahead and then also another step to think, where is the value actually going to accrue and to which markets specifically. And a lot of investors, you hear this saying from VCs. They say we invest in people, and it's true. You bet on founders, you bet on people, and it's definitely like a very kind of like widely held approach. But I think actually the more sound approach is to actually invest in markets, because if you're investing in the wrong market, right founder, it's probably going to be a small outcome. And venture is all about big outcomes. Your outliers, they actually return most of the funds. Like if you look at the numbers, talk to the big investors at Benchmark or even Andreessen and different shops. They make a lot of their gains on the book from just a small handful of investments, which are the ones they sort of have like called out on their page, right? Like the Googles, Coinbases of the world are the ones that actually return most of the book. So if it's a game of outliers, you want to be concentrated, but also you sort of want to be able to have the conviction to be able to stomach these ups and downs, right? Because a lot of people get shaken out of positions. They hold tokens at some point, they sell them, and they don't have that first principle of reasoning to actually invest in the right market. They sort of bet on people, and then you know people are fragile, right? They have real life stuff. They get burned out. They get all these different things. But fundamentally, if you're attacking a big market and there's a huge market opportunity, even if the founder is good, or maybe he's not like the best founder you've ever met, but he or she is shipping fast and they're attacking the right market. The probability that you have a big outcome there is much higher than an amazing founder just attacking the wrong space. And sort of like that's how we view it. It's sort of like that first principles, like trying to envision what the future looks like and where value is going to accrue, but specifically to which markets. And that's sort of like where markets first and then founders and products second.
Well, that's first. Thanks for that very thorough answer. But that's very thesis driven. It's very right curve. It's very logic based. So let's talk about something a little bit more mid curve. How do you approach NFTs? Like, I
Okay.
That
imagine that's
Let's
like
that
go.
a
that was my
totally different.
question.
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
the way I just feel like it's almost an entirely different skill set, right? You need to
Yeah.
be you need to have an eye for culture. You need to have an eye for community. It's
Yep.
it's it like you can talk about really intelligently about
Yeah.
how to pick sort of infrastructure projects all day.
Yep.
Is our NFTs fun, like picking the right projects? Is that a fundamentally different process? Am I right about that?
Before you answer that, I just want to say that Andrew, you and I we hang out way too much, because that was
We
exactly my next question. And I
yeah.
was even going to say, I was like, this is a right curve thing. We need to bring back to like either mid curve or left curve. Let's talk about NFTs
Yeah.
culture.
Ne- Never mid curve. That's my golden rule in crypto. Never middle curve anything. You can right
Yeah,
curve, you can left curve, never middle curve. But it's a great
that's
name
right.
for the show, I have to say. So basically, NFTs, like at their core, um, NFTs are just objects, right? They're just things. It's just a way to tokenize something, and basically, it's almost like a new file format, right? Like if you guys remember, at one point, music was a concert, right? And then music became a vinyl, right? And then after that, music became a cassette. And after a cassette, music was a CD, right? And after a CD, it was sort of like an MP3, right? Um, and then they drop the MP3 title, and then it's just sort of just music, right? And I sort of view NFTs as the same thing. Like NFTs are everything. Like this umbrella behind me could be an NFT, right? I don't know if you can see it. Or this podcast could be an NFT, right? A stock or a bond or a piece of real estate could be an NFT. So it's really the tokenization of everything. But as it relates to like digital collectibles, which is what I think you guys are asking about, um, I think NFTs are about sort of community first, and the three fundamental pillars of NFTs broadly are like sort of like art, community, and utility, right? And I wrote an article about this. It's sort of like the NFT triangle. But generally speaking, to be a good NFT trader, you don't have to overcomplicate it. You just need to look where the attention is. NFTs are a proxy for attention, and they're a proxy for culture. So, buying the right NFT early is proof of being early, right? You have it on chain. You can say you minted apes. You can say you minted CryptoPunks. You can say you swept SMB early, like Madlads, whatever you want. It's sort of like a display of conviction to other people. But the core innovation of PFPs is that you could flex them online, right? And this is sort of like in the digital era that we live in, and I've spoken with this with sort of like big content creators as well. Like we've gotten to the point where for a big influencer with 10 million followers on Instagram, the photo of his luxury watch on his Instagram is worth more than the watch itself. Because only so many people can see this in real life. Like if you've got a Picasso in your house, like, okay, you can invite your richest friends around. You guys can all, stand there sipping wine and sort of looking at it and admiring what a nice painting it is. But it's not scalable. Like, you can't just leave it in the open. It's gonna get, spoiled or stolen or whatever. But NFTs are different. They're the atomic sort of like subunit of culture and community in crypto for a reason, because you can flex them infinitely. It's almost like being able to rep a Fabergé egg to everyone in the world, and it has the provenance of like people know that like Legend owns this, right? Or it's Legend's PFP, and this is sort of like the beauty and the superpower of like those community and network effects scale super hard. So to pick the right NFT, sure, it can have provenance, it can have utility, it can have art. The biggest thing is it needs to have community and it needs to have attention. Those are sort of like the solid, pillars of a community or a collection that really like in my time, like as a trader and looking at these things, this is where value accrues to in the most like, I would say, regular way. Now, not to say there's not like, say casino NFTs that have like rev share and they do all these different constructs that it can accrue value. It's very possible, but I would just say more often than not, sort of you know, attention and community. Those are the two pillars that are the most dependable.
Was that kind of your thesis when you went into Mad Lads? And also, can you just like maybe give us an idea or your thoughts on where Mad Lads is headed? Because Mad Lads is kind of the biggest right now on Solana.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mad Lads, I mean, the story of Madlads started a couple years ago, actually. Like, I used to work with Tristan, one of the co-founders of Backpack. I used to work with him at a past company that I'm sure we've all heard of, infamously. Um, but basically, the idea of Madlads is sort of like to create that those native like villagers or residents. If Backpack, the exchange, and the wallet is the town, then Madlads are the residents. And I use the term residents because there's this whole debate of like tourists versus residents. And I think more often than not, a lot of people are tourists and they don't realize it. They kind of show up every couple years. Maybe they make some money, maybe they lose some money, and then they sort of like peace out. But Mad Lads for me represents something that's much more like it's much more consistent on this sort of like space time continuum, and it represents a community that basically took a chance on something that people didn't understand. And I sort of like wrote a thread about this. Like, it's not actually an exaggeration to say that some of the top Mad Lads whales that swept early on understood the backpack thesis before leading crypto venture funds did, because they were much closer to the metal, they were much more plugged in, and they actually were like using this stuff every day and touching it, right? And I think sort of like the beauty of Mad Lads is that they're the residents and they're sort of like the most diehard and like amazing community in crypto, in my opinion. These guys are content creators. They're extremely loud to the point that like Michelin, the restaurant guide, reached out and was literally like, without even like knowing what this was, they were like, this community is insane. We want to work with them. They have like crazy energy, right? And I was in Tokyo at the time with the team, and they were like, dude, Michelin just reached out to us. They want to create a Mad Lad, like Mad Albert trait for their collection because they think like Mad Lads are awesome, right? And I sort of like think of like people focus so much on product and they don't focus enough on distribution. And arguably distribution is like harder to achieve. Like, you actually need like a whole army of people that care deeply about your product and will show up every day, whether there's rewards or not. And sort of like that's what Backpack's been able to find with Mad Lads. And I think it's a sign of someone that has high conviction, and it's also the sign of someone who's like forward thinking. They're willing and able to bet on a next generation sort of like wallet and exchange. So that's sort of like my backpack thesis. It's very simple. Like, they also look amazing. I talked actually to a really well-known hedge fund guy in Dubai, and he has a Mad Lads PFP. And I asked him, "Why did you buy a Mad Lad?" And I was expecting this like giga-brained answer, and he literally said, "They have the prettiest clothes. Like, they look so good. I just had to buy one." I was like, "Wow, that's not what I expected." But art is also important. Eye-catching art, I think, is there's no substitute for it. So, anyways, that's sort of like a long-winded answer, but if you're bullish on Backpack and what they stand for and like sort of the fastest growing exchange in crypto, and you want to get involved with like the core community that has like basically a front row seat, I think Mad Lads are the best collection in crypto.
Hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the new style of NFTs that are coming? NFT
Yeah,
404s or SBF
absolutely.
404s?
And maybe this is a good segue to Abel as well. I didn't
Yeah.
forget about you guys. So
Yeah.
there's not going to be any angry pitchforks and torches in the comments. But basically, like, the two crypto products, just zooming out, the two crypto products for retail that have the highest product market fit by far are sort of like meme coins and sort of like, more broadly like shit coins, and JPEGs and PFPs, right? So fundamentally, what hybrids represent is the opportunity to put both of those kind of killer retail products into one, which I think is amazing. Like, just on the surface of it, high level, that's already like an extremely compelling and bullish like use case. But broadly speaking, this cycle has been dominated by meme coins. Like, people sort of have like, maybe it's the fast dopamine culture. Maybe it's sort of like people have gone from like watching a theater opera to sort of like watching a movie. Then they watch a 30-minute TV show, and then they watch a YouTube video that's 5 minutes, and now they watch TikToks that are 30 seconds long or
Yeah.
even 15 seconds long, right? It's like the fast dopamine culture. It's getting faster and faster, right? And the money is getting faster. And when you're on crypto rails, um, there's no limit pretty much to how fast this can get. Like, just the only limits are the limits of physics, right? So it's sort of like, meme coins represent, sort of like a mint, or maybe like kind of like an ICO, right? They represent like that community forming phase, and everything is like super expedited. It's like, basically it's an entire NFT collection, like in a speed run format, right? So, really, meme coins are dominating, but I think what people are forgetting is that people still want to rep the community, and the best way to do that is with PFPs. So fundamentally, what 404s enable is essentially the implicit and seamless transfer of a fungible token to a non-fungible, and a non-fungible to a fungible token. So back and forth. And the best analogy I can give is like, imagine you have an ice cube. It's solid. It's non-fungible, and then you can melt that down into a liquid, and you can do a partial sale. Assume no like evaporation and loss of molecules, whatever. It's just a fixed amount of molecules of tokens, and it's a sustainable token economy, because no tokens leave or enter the pool. It's always the same amount, and it's always convertible, according to a certain like rate. Like, say one PFP is 10,000 tokens forever, right? And I think, for example, for games, this is really exciting, because now your native in-game token is actually the same as your PFPs. It's all one sort of like pool, right? So if people really want to rep the PFPs, they buy the token, and it's sort of like a supply shock. A bunch of the token is locked up in PFPs that have like emotional value. People don't want to sell them, and vice versa. Sort of like, if someone buys the token, the price goes up, and it creates arbitrage opportunities where you can essentially, if the token price is pumped and the NFTs are still low, you can buy the NFTs, break them down, and then sell the tokens, and sort of like arb that difference, right? So it creates a lot of like new dynamics and new behavior, and sort of like novel on-chain experiences that I think are going to be very cool. It actually enables new business models as well, for membership passes, for all these different things, even with DeFi. So I think it's really exciting, and I've actually gone on the record before and said, I think hybrids, NFTs are sort of out, but hybrids are what bring NFTs back, and I totally stand by that statement. And actually, just this week, Abel was the first meme coin to actually hybridize, so to convert their essentially meme coin to essentially what will be hybrid 404 PFPs. So I'm extremely excited. These guys are trailblazers, and they're absolutely crushing it. But I think, just more generally, 404 adoption is sort of like slow right now. The tooling and everything is a little bit complicated. But as soon as it's a little bit easier and people sort of like understand how significant this is, I think the adoption is going to go absolutely parabolic. And let me just end sort of this like small rant with one last comment. Like, when you can be both a JPEG and a token, and you can do both of those things, why would you only ever just be one? There's no downside, virtually no downsides. It's sort of like a no compromise solution to having both. And I think that's sort of like the light bulb moment that went off in my head a couple months ago. And I think people are just sort of catching up to it now.
Yeah, more meme coins that double as PFPs. That becoming a meta trend definitely makes sense to me. Um, Talk to me a little bit about like some of your big hits, though. I feel like anybody who's been around crypto long enough, they always have some crazy story about how they hit. Like they were the first person to ever deploy a liquidator blot. They found some stupid arbitrage. It sounds like
Yeah.
you were super early to Solana, so obviously that's going to be a big win for you. But do you have any like fun war stories? What were some of your really big hits, either at Frictionless or even just personally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest was definitely Solana Monkey Business Mint. I minted about 30 or 40 of these monkeys, PFPs. It was the first kind of true mass appeal PFP on Solana. I'll never forget. It was August 2nd, 2021, and the mint price was 2 Sol. Sol was about $34, and I think it was almost exactly $69 per monkey, which was kind of poetic and mimetic. But I minted a bunch of these, and it was pre-Metaplex. It was very, very early, and almost like no one cared about NFTs on Solana. They thought they were sort of like a meme. There had been some prior collections, sort of like Soul Punks, which are like a CryptoPunk derivative. There was Creatures, Solarians were still minting out slowly on the bonding curve. Um, but these monkeys were different. They were sort of like, looked a little bit like CryptoPunks, and they were 8-bit monkeys, just really cute PFPs. And I was like, you know what? For whatever reason, I'm gonna go heavy on these. Like I'm gonna mint a lot of them. Like I'm gonna mint like, you know, as many as I can. So I sat there clicking for like, I don't know, must have been like 30 minutes. And then I minted like 25 of them. And of course, you know, there weren't that many people on Solana. I think there was less than a couple 100,000 wallets. I think there's like 100,000 people active on Solana, like that week or that month or something. It was pretty limited. So I actually had time to like take my dog for a walk, have some lunch, come back and mint some more. You could literally mint as many as you wanted. So I minted like 40 or 50 of them. And in 3 months, they went from $70 to 55,000. Just a floor monkey, just a normal one. And I minted some rares that went to like a million plus. So it's sort of like that was a huge win. That was like literally a 900x in terms of like basically just sheer like returns. But I think what's really interesting is just sort of like the provenance of being early and being right. If like you're the first PFP on Solana, like what does that mean for sort of like, you know, like being right and being able to point to it, but also like the significance of SMB and the DAO and Monkey DAO and everything. That was truly like ground zero moment for NFT culture on Solana. And if you look at the founders of Monkey DAO, right, like what they went on to do, people like Nam, who's an early contributor to Bonk, a great friend of mine, like absolutely crushed it. Sort of that OG school from that Discord, from SMB Discord, was literally like folks like Soul Big Brain, Ice Knife, Soul Buckets, myself, you know, some of the biggest founders and hackathon winners in the space were all sort of like coming from that. So it was like a very interesting and historically significant time on Solana, but it was also like, in terms of sheer like returns, like an absolute ripper by anyone's imagination.
Yeah, I also minted S&B like on, day one or whatever, but I only bought one. So I'm kicking myself for that. I wish I would have bought a bunch
You
more.
can wipe your tears away with those 55,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then the hard part
Yeah.
is not selling, right? A lot of people minted
Yeah.
as many as me or more. The question is like who has the conviction and sort of like the ability to just diamond hand. And most people didn't. Most people flipped for like a 2x and called it a day or 3x. Or, you know, the smart guys sold for a 10x and they thought they were
Yeah.
geniuses. But then, you know, the floor went from like 2 SOL to 300 in the same period that Solana went from like 30 to 250. So you can imagine that like derivative effect of like the floor and base coin price rising in tandem was like kind of crazy.
Yep. Yeah, I would have probably paper handed it, but I forgot that I had it, and then I looked at it, and it was at 110 SOL floor price, and so I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna sell." I minted for two, sell for
Uh,
110. Yeah, that was a good trade. I mean, yeah, again, like I'm just kicking myself for not minting more of them. But yeah, you mentioned, I think like we're coming up on time here, so maybe let's just wrap up with something else interesting that you're thinking or seeing, or like you mentioned DPIN, just like where we're going on Solana, where you think Solana is going. Just give us some thoughts on any of those
yeah.
topics.
Yeah, this is an open floor to give us all financial advice right now.
Yes, exactly. Financial.
All financial advice, not financial advice, but I think honestly, like it's an incredibly interesting and dynamic time on Solana right now. Like you sort of have had a renaissance of DeFi, and I sort of like people challenging sort of like how applicable some of these like legacy metrics are, like TVL. That's sort of like the age old like power rating of an ecosystem. But Solana does literally 50 times as much volume as Ethereum per unit of TVL. So I think like the story of Solana is going to continue to be one of like challenging established conceptions of what blockchains are and aren't, and sort of like breaking down barriers. And I think Jito is also at the forefront of this. Like Jito has innovated in a lot of very interesting ways and plays such a pivotal role at like the crossroads of the ecosystem, whether that's from like the liquid staking side or sort of like the block builder and searcher that they have and all these different things that I think companies like Jito are leading the way, and there's a huge potential for other top founders to really like pick up the torch and to not build like the X of Y of like this the X of Solana, but to actually just innovate. And it's blue water, right? Because the infrastructure on Solana is so performant, whether it's DPIN or these different games that are coming out, or even some of the next generation sort of like order flow segmentation stuff with companies like DFlow that I think are crushing it. There's a huge potential to actually like invent a category and just own it. And I think in business, a lot of people like, fight for an existing category. I'd say that's sort of like a losing battle and sort of like a loser's game. But the smartest builders are the ones that are able to just invent a category or redefine it and sort of place themselves at the center of it. And that's what Jito has done. And that's what the best companies on Solana have done, in my opinion. Folks like Tensor, Backpack, and others, even Magic Eden to an extent, like has done and has executed arguably one of the only successful multi-chain go-to-markets like ever. Like everyone else crashed and burned, and Magic Eden sort of like crushed it with Bitcoin. So I think there's a lot of bright future ahead. I mean, people are optimistic. I'm just bullish on the community as well. Like a community that's gone to hell and back, that literally was in a Twitter Spaces on December, I think it was 26th or 27th when we hit $7 or $8. Like there's about a couple thousand people in a Twitter Spaces. I remember it vividly, and we were ready to ride this to zero. Like we were ready to say goodbye and literally like say goodbye to our friends and just sort of like forever. It was over, right? It was like so over. It's like the "it's so over" meme, but like in real life. And like there's not too many communities that have actually like survived a hot iron like crucible moment like that, right? I think the only other two blockchains that I can think of that have gone through that are called Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I'm sort of like bullish on people that have been to hell and back and have been forged, because I think that the strongest communities are forged in those like in the hottest flames. And that's the best analogy I can give. But I think the Solana community is extremely strong and will continue to be like honestly a competitive advantage for Solana. Like a lot of blockchains have tech, but the community is arguably harder to optimize for at this point. The tech is sort of like a solved problem. People, have a known solution. They're sort of like working through the labyrinth and the maze to sort of reach it. But the community takes a lot of creativity, and it takes a little bit of the stars aligning, to be completely honest.
Wow. First of all, I just want to say that speech got me fired up. That was like almost like a Braveheart
Fucking go
style
for it.
speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like like getting a little emotional over here. This guy.
Look, man,
But
it's important. The community. I love these podcasts because it gives me a chance to sort of like recap of like to understand where we're going. You have to remember like where we came from, right? This is very important and kind of central to the plot. So yeah.
yeah, 100%. And I think like you and some other guys I've been talking to lately have all kind of confirmed my own thesis, and that like culture is very important when it comes to a blockchain. And it's like the core thesis of a lot of funds right now. But Solana seems to be like internet culture on chain. And I think that's pretty powerful. I think a lot of the other chains kind of missed the boat on that. Bitcoin has its own thing, but yeah, Solana for sure is like it's like internet culture on chain, and I love that. So I think we'll wrap it up here. We've been going for almost 45 minutes now, but I just want to thank you for coming on. This has been awesome. It's nice, like me and you, and I'm sure we'll get to hang out at some conferences here soon.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for the podcast. Great questions, and it was an absolute joy coming on.